This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. You're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel now. Today we deal with taxi violence that continues to cost lives here in South Africa. 16 days of activism to deal with violence against women and children launches today. We look at unruliness in Parliament and then conclude with a South African that's making her mark globally. But first, let's get the day's news from Katrine Miller.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Miller, and let's just take a look at those news items making headlines this morning. We start in the United States this morning, where a decision by a grand jury not to indict a police officer for the fatal shooting of black teenager Michael Brown has resulted in rioting and looting in Ferguson, Missouri. Officer Darren Wilson potentially faced charges ranging from first-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter for the killing of Brown, in a case that has enraged the community. On hearing the decision, protesters went on the rampage, breaking into different stores, smashing windows and looting them. The family of Michael Brown have meanwhile expressed their disappointment at the decision, but appealed for calm.
To those in Ferguson, there are ways of channeling your concerns constructively, and there are ways of channeling your concerns destructively.
Back in South Africa, the state will today present its arguments against the discharge application in the Srindavani murder case in the Western Cape High Court. Devani's defence says the state has not presented any credible evidence upon which the court can convict him. A positive ruling for the defence in this application will see the end of the trial and Devani's acquittal on the charges against him. A ruling against it will either see the defence closing its case or calling witnesses of its own to testify. As 16 days of violence against women and children kicks off today, final post-mortem results of a 3-year-old girl who was a victim of abuse are expected next Monday. The toddler from Chatsworth outside Durban died after being abused for a long time, allegedly by her mother and grandmother. The woman appeared in court yesterday on murder charges. The two have been remanded in custody and will be back in court next Thursday. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa has blamed the Democratic Alliance for the collapse of the deal between him and opposition parties. Ramaphosa met with opposition leaders yesterday in an attempt to revive the deal that collapsed the day after it was reached last week. It included suspending sanctions against 20 EFF members of Parliament that included having their salaries docked and being suspended from Parliament. Ramaphosa has accused the DA of going against the spirit of the deal.
The deal is off because you mentioned the name of Zuma, Luthuli House, honchos would panic beyond comprehension. I told them that all what we are asking for is for President Zuma to come and account to Parliament, and it must not be trade-offs. That Zuma will not come to Parliament and therefore will not put a matter of powers and privileges on the agenda of Parliament.
And the ANC has decided to disband its Youth Wing's National Task Team and called for its National Elective Conference to be now a policy conference. The League's conference at the University of Johannesburg's Soweto campus was expected to begin today. The decision was taken following a marathon meeting between the ANC National Executive Committee and NTT members that lasted until late into the night. Now remember, all those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrine. There's an old African axiom that says it takes a village to raise a child. But these days, kids continue to face abuse and are even killed at the hands of their caregivers. Last week, a grandmother of a 3-year-old toddler was taken into custody after the toddler was found dead at a home in Durban. According to reports, the girl had cigarette burns all over her face and body, and her fingernails and toenails seemed to have been yanked out. When children are exposed to violence, it affects their ability at school and has long-term implications for their health. Research conducted by the Children's Institute at the University of Cape Town found that a high percentage of South African children die before the age of 5, and millions of children in this country live well below the poverty line. Now, today marks the launch of the 16 days of activism for No Violence Against Women and Children campaign here in South Africa. And we are joined by the COE of the South African Human Rights Commission, Mr. K.M. Ahmed. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
The President will launch the 16 Days of Activism campaign a little bit later, I think on the East Rand here in Johannesburg. Just tell us, how do you view this campaign, and do you believe this kind of campaign is making an impact in South Africa?
I think as the Human Rights Commission, we believe that campaigns such as the 16 Days of Activism campaign is absolutely essential. And we work alongside other Chapter 9 institutions such as the Commission on Gender Equality to draw attention to the levels of violence and crime against women and children, particularly in this country. And I think it's an important opportunity for us to reflect on this culture of violence that we have as a country and how we can develop mechanisms to ensure that this violence is dealt with effectively. We have excellent pieces of legislation in place. The big question is, how do we go about implementing this legislation?
Violence against children, especially in these reports that we see, it says it goes underreported in South Africa. In your experience, why is that the case, that cases, especially involving children, goes underreported?
There's a fascinating case we dealt with recently in the Free State where various children were being subjected to systemic incidents of racism and corporal punishment, which is a form of violence against children in the classroom by their teacher. When we interviewed the children in that particular classroom, about 81% of them indicated that they had told their parents that what was happening in the classroom. But very few people responded, very few of the parents reacted. I think that we've become, as a society, so inherently connected and interconnected with violence that we don't necessarily respond in the same way we do. There's sort of a dulling of the senses in some ways. And this is part of the problem. I think it speaks to broader challenges we face as a society in terms of this culture of violence, which requires a deep sense of reflection and analysis for us to be able to develop interventions.
In South Africa, you talk that we are okay with violence in a way.
Sure.
We live in a society where children are exposed to violence every day. On television, they see violence every day. Even on the cartoons, violence is accepted in South Africa, whereas it would be unacceptable to see somebody nude, for instance. Does that make us crazy? Do we lose the plot as we ask the question, why are we killing each other in this country, but we expose ourselves to violence, but we have problems with nudity?
I think you raise a fundamental issue around our prioritization of challenges we face as a society. Clearly, violence should be one of the key challenges we face. There's questions around nudity and so on, which speaks to questions of morality and ethics, is certainly something that could be debated and discussed. But the immediate issue, as we've seen from various cases we've dealt with recently as the Commission, violence against children is an absolute imperative. But this is not unique to South Africa, of course. We've recently seen some of the protests in Ferguson in the United States, where violence by police officers in particular has been brought under the spotlight. In South Africa, we have similar challenges with police and violence in relation to our country. So it's important that we connect all the dots and that we adopt a holistic approach to this issue.
As the Human Rights Commission in South Africa, you deal with this kind of thing, one would think, almost on a daily basis. Yeah. What would you like to see happen in this country in dealing not only with violence against children, but at the higher levels of violence against women as well in South Africa?
Absolutely. I think that this is possibly a three-pronged approach. The one is at the policy and legislative level. We have, as I mentioned before, excellent piece of legislation in place. It's the question around implementation of this legislation that's a problem. So the court system, the police, these are all parts of the puzzle that need to be dealt with and dealt with quite effectively. I think at the secondary level, the kind of research that we do as the Human Rights Commission in conjunction with the institutes such as the Children Institutes and various other institutions must be given the kind of priority that's required in order to develop more effective mechanisms. I think this is a key issue. The third is a question of leadership and a question of being able to have the political will to implement these sorts of decisions. We've seen how government has been quite effective in certain areas and have lacked significantly in others. And I think it's time that we put the spotlight on violence, and particularly violence against children and women, so that we can deal with this question effectively.
Some of the acts that are being committed against young children are simply horrendous and almost unmentionable. In South Africa, do we do enough to ensure that the perpetrators of these horrific crimes against children are brought to book?
Absolutely not. And I think this is one of the fundamental problems. People feel that those who commit crimes are able to get away with these crimes, largely because of an ineffective police system. And I'm not blaming individual police officers. I think the system as a whole needs to be evaluated. The second element is, of course, the court system. It takes a long time for victims to see justice in the court system. And we know that the percentage of perpetrators who get arrested and who then get convicted is very, very small compared to the high numbers of violence we see in the country. So those are the two fundamental legs of our justice system that require various interventions to be able to make it a lot more effective.
How would you like us to deal as a nation with this almost Calvinistic problem that we have of exposing our children to guns and violence within the parental home, but naked breasts, for instance, is seen as an absolute no-no and totally taboo. But you can expose that child to violence and you can expose them to weapons and all sorts within the parental home.
I have friends recently who decided to adopt a child, and they had to go through a very stringent process in order to ensure that they could adopt a child. And many of them were saying that many couples are able to have kids without having to go through that process of counseling, of preparation in order to receive a newborn child. And I think what's required in this country is possibly an assessment of the challenges that parents face on a daily basis, having to deal with raising a child, let alone providing them with the moral and emotional basis to support them. And so I think this sort of assistance for parents is going to be absolutely critical. We also understand that we live in a country where most or many children are raised by single parents, as opposed to the joint parental unit, which has its own issues and challenges. And so I think greater support for parents is probably one of the areas that's going to be required in order to deal with some of these issues that you raise.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Of course, just for those of you at home that don't know, today we launched the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children here in South Africa. The President will be coming to you live a little bit later as we open up that campaign. It will be launched on the East Rand. Thank you very much to Qayyum Ahmed, who is the CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission. Thank you for joining us today. Let's have a look at your views. What are you saying? How are you raising your children? More importantly, are you beating them? You shouldn't be. You should be thinking of other ways to discipline them. Maybe talk to them a little bit more. Terry Stander says 16 days of activism against women and child abuse starts today. It's not limited to 16 days. Speak out against all forms of abuse every single day. Yes, that is the only way we're going to deal with it. Kalina says, as we start 16 days of activism, let's spare a thought for hashtag Jamie Faith Naidoo, who the system failed. No 3-year-old should go through that very sad face. Yes, we have these issues here in South Africa. Lebo says, 16 days of activism, has this campaign yielded positive result in the past, or has it been reduced to just a rhetoric? That is a legitimate question. However, how can we not have these campaigns if we are killing our children and abusing them, burning them with cigarettes? Neo Smile says, don't turn a blind eye to abuse, say no to abuse. It's easy if you're a grown-up, but what about children who are placed in the care? We saw a nanny kick a baby to death over the weekend. Darini Daluwate says, International Day End Violence Against Women, join 16 days activism. Orange your hood. Let us ensure dignity and respect for all women and children, Darini, I might want to add. Vaneshri Naidu says, the story of baby Jamie and every other tragic story is enough to make me wonder, what's the point of 16 days? Vaneshri, imagine if there was no 16 days. Just imagine that. Will we see more of these cases? Will we see more of our children being beaten, being kicked in the head, being burnt with cigarettes? We have a real problem in our country with regards to violence against women and children. It's all of our responsibility to deal with it. Now we can move on to more violence, unfortunately. In the past 2 decades, thousands of South African taxi owners, drivers and passengers have been killed, and many more have been wounded in one of the strangest guerrilla wars to bedevil any nation. The South African taxi industry also plays an important role in the economy, considering that the majority of South Africans are poor and dependent on this type of public transport, but the problems associated with the industry often results in the deaths of the innocent. The recent incident that has claimed the lives of 5 people during a drive-by shooting in Boksburg has heightened the continued scourge of violence that continues to plague the industry today. Well, we are joined by Santaco's president today, Mr. Philip Taibosh. He's here to talk to us about this emotive issue in South Africa. Very good morning to you, Mr. Taibosh. Thank you for joining us. You heard what I said. It was a mouthful, almost like we're fighting a guerrilla war against ourselves sometimes, it seems. I want to ask you firstly, your response to this latest incident where we saw 5 lives lost on the East Rand here in Johannesburg.
Let me say good morning to your viewers, and thank you for having Santaco here. Firstly, we must indicate our disgust, dismay, and, we are not sure what to say about what has happened, but we say that you had to spit with saliva on what has happened there, because it is not the way in which business people, even human beings, should be living like. And we are saying that the perpetrators of this particular taxi violence should really be brought before the law, and the wrath of the law should take place and ensure that we are not having such incidents anymore. I must indicate that what is very sad within the industry is that we don't have, as Santaco, we don't have teeth to bite, because we don't have regulatory powers. We cannot take strict action against an operator or even expel an operator when he has transgressed to an extent that violence is very serious. And we want to see people coming to taxi ranks. We want to see people getting into a taxi and getting out of the taxis alive. And we cannot have the taxi industry as a battlefield for war.
Now, we see that Santaco, you guys are very involved with the Road Management Corporation and helping to curb accidents and these kinds of things. Isn't there a scenario where Santaco should maybe take a lead role in dealing with violence? Because much like we see in accidents, people are losing their lives.
I think we must be careful not to, throw everything out. Unless maybe we need to be updated with the history of violence in the country. I must indicate that Santaco, from the word go, after the formation of Santaco, we took very serious to the issue of violence. And hence, for the last 10, 12 years, there has not been violence in this country on the taxis, except since last year when sporadic kind of violence happened. But what is more important is that it is the taxi industry themselves who have been going out there to ensure that they are dampening the violence. Let me indicate to you what happened in Western Cape. Western Cape, I think the police have folded arms because they didn't know what to do with the situation. I went in through the Western Cape. I spent 3 months in the Western Cape. And as I'm talking to you now in the Western Cape, there is complete peace in the industry. Taxi people came out of a meeting in the Western Cape very seriously in Langa, Guguletu, Khayelitsha, having signed a memorandum which says that we will not resolve our issues through the barrel of gun or the violence. So I'm trying to say that if the government was tomorrow to give Santaco some kind of regulations when it comes to governing and also ensuring that there is total discipline in our taxi ranks. I think the example I'm using always is of the Law Society, of a lot of professional bodies in the country, that if you give me a piece of that, I will be able to ensure that the taxi operator who is found guilty by the law of causing violence, that person's taxi license is taken forever. He will not return to the taxis again.
I want to ask you, I've seen some reports in various media outlets in recent times. They say the spike that we see now in violence in the taxi industry, some of it is caused by forces outside of the taxi industry that's making a play for some of the let's call it lucrative routes within the existing taxi structures. What do you say to that?
Listen, I must indicate to you that I've got the same suspicion that there are other forces, outside the taxi industry. If one looks at what has happened in Mamelodi and the way violence has taken place in Mamelodi, and you go back to Reiger Park, Boksburg, and Vosloorus, and you listen to the operators, you will find out that there are other forces outside the taxi industry who are pushing to eradicate those who are legally supposed to be doing business there. I'm meeting with the leadership of the Ekurhuleni Santako Taxi Council now at 12 o'clock. And my meeting with them is to get to the understanding of what is really happening and how we can approach the entire situation.
What about cartelism, if there is such a word, the development of cartels within the taxi industry, and then drivers who almost operate like they belong to a gang within this cartel, and the threats that they hold for the industry and then the public at large? How you plan to deal with that kind of thing?
I think let us take the drivers out. We must stop blaming the drivers. This is not a driver's fight. It's a taxi operator's fight. And what is happening is that we should not allow anybody within the taxi industry, whether it is the so-called associations, to operate within the taxi industry. Let me indicate to you that taxi associations were, according to the discussions, agreement between government and the taxi industry, the registration of taxi associations were prohibited since 1997. And one is, you get surprised to see that in Gauteng in particular, it's not happening in other provinces. In Gauteng in particular, you hear about the taxi association, which has been formed 6 years, 2 years, 8 years down the line, and you ask yourself, what has happened to the agreement? And that's where the taxi industry begin to have its doubts about Gauteng being a country within a country.
That's very worrying indeed. But Mr. Tabas, thank you. We've run out of time, unfortunately. Thank you for joining us today and fronting up and dealing honestly with the kind of challenges facing the taxi industry and commuters all around South Africa. Thank you once again for joining us today. Well, time for us now to take a short little look at the front pages from around the globe. In the United States, well, the Star Ledger reports that Ferguson in Missouri is a city on the edge. This as new violent protests have erupted there overnight after demonstrators learned there would be no criminal indictment of the police officer, Darrell Wilson, for the death of Michael Brown. 12 shots fired, 6 hit the young man. The Scotsman has a picture on the front page there showing how Edinburgh lit up for Christmas. Then we go down under in Australia. The Daily Telegraph is looking at the story of a newborn baby that has been saved from a Western Sydney drain. Very interesting. We see these stories in South Africa where babies are dumped quite often. Australia, well, there you see it, front page. Over there. It doesn't make the front pages in South Africa, unfortunately, anymore. Before we go to an ad break, let's just have a quick look at what's happening across the country today. In Johannesburg, the ANC Youth League's National Congress will get underway at the University of Johannesburg's Soweto campus. We stay in Johannesburg. The Commission for Gender Equality, right here you see it. Is it over here? It's over there. Over there. We'll see. On transformation. Then in Cape Town, the National Energy Regulator of South Africa will hold a public hearing on license applications for the construction of petroleum storage and loading facilities in the Western Cape and also in the mother city. The Tobacco Institute of South Africa is holding its conference on illicit tobacco trade in sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, it is a real problem. Also, the hijacking of tobacco trucks, I'm sure, will be under the spotlight. Illicit cigarettes, illegal trade in cigarettes, the like, you name it, it's all happening. Time for us to take a short break. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
into Africa. This is Gabon. The president is Mr. Ali Ben Bongo. Gabon got independent from France on August 17 in 1960. The population is over 1 million people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is CFA.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom here on SABC News. The deal between Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa and opposition parties is finally off. The announcement was made after Ramaphosa met opposition parties in Gauteng yesterday. The initiative was aimed at finding a solution to the current tension in Parliament. It has been days that the South African Parliament has been moving from one crisis to another, from one chaotic sitting to another, it seems. Following dramatic days and a 7-hour delay on Thursday last week, the National Assembly resumed at 9 o'clock in the evening, and proceedings unprecedentedly continued until around 4 a.m. on Friday morning. The root cause of the problem is parliamentary parties are not able to reach an agreement on, amongst others, the Nkandla report and how to enforce accountability. Another sticky point is a report on sanctions against 20 economic freedom fighters, members of Parliament found guilty of disrupting and then interrupting President Jacob Zuma on the 21st of August of this year. Now, political analyst Dr. Dirk Kotze from the University of South Africa joins us in our studio in Pretoria today. A very good morning to you, Dr. Kotze. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
I would like to get your independent view, firstly. What do you make of proceedings in Parliament nowadays and the message that it's sending?
Well, I think as we all see, it is very unconventional. It is much different from before the 2014 election. Opposition is much more visible. In the process, I would say Parliament has become also a forum for public debate, much more than in the past. But many people are concerned about the constitutional status of Parliament, to what extent the opposition is not anymore following the decorum and the procedures of Parliament. From my point of view, I think it looks like a new process that's emerging, a sort of a birth almost of a new way in which Parliament is going to evolve over time, in which there's much more direct interaction or even contestation between majority parties like the ANC and the minority parties. So on the surface of it, it looks very negative or disruptive, but I think out of it may emerge something which is much more worthwhile and that will provide more of a forum for the opposition parties to interact with government than what it was in the past. And at the same time also insist on more accountability from the executive authority side.
Doctor, what about the dignity and the integrity of the House? Are we not in danger of losing that?
No, that is for sure a danger. But I think one should not so much concentrate on the dignity that the effectiveness of Parliament is in the process sacrificed. Now, if we look around the world, parliaments are forums where there's a lot of high tension. Just in the past 2 years, there were fistfights in parliaments of Russia, Ukraine, South Korea, India, Brazil. So it is not just in our parliament that these type of high emotions are taking place. And I think the reason for that is because parliaments are the forum where the different political parties come the closest to each other and where the real interaction, the real contact between parliaments are taking on a continuous basis. So if it is a sterile, very quiet atmosphere there, then we actually must know there's something wrong.
I want to ask you about this deal that we saw that's now collapsed yesterday. Firstly, how do you view the intervention that was made? And secondly, now that the deal has collapsed, what do you see happening? Do we see more chaos coming in Parliament now?
Well, initially I thought the intervention by the Deputy President, by Cyril Ramaphosa, was a very positive one because there was a stalemate in Parliament and the main persons, and especially the Speaker, who was supposed to take the lead to a large extent, became one of the parties in the dispute. So she was ruled out in order to really make any intervention. At the same time, President Zuma, who is like supposed to be almost the father figure that should, or presidential figure that should be intervened, is in the same situation. So the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa made that intervention, though there's some criticism even from within his own party, I thought was a way out, a way of creating new communication between the different parties, preventing maybe or preempting similar situations in future. I think what we've seen now is a lot of internal politics, both within the DA, the EFF, and the ANC, having the effect that the deal is off. I think what Cyril Ramaphosa is doing is trying to play off the DA against the EFF, because his main bargaining chip is to suspend the suspension of the EFF, and they are very eager that should happen. But the fact that the DA tabled the motion of censure last week is now used by Ramaphosa very conveniently, I would say, in order to create the split between the two, which is one of the main objectives, I would say, from the ANC side. They are very concerned about the cooperation between the EFF and the DA in Parliament. But at the same time, I think what we are also seeing is that all the parties really lost, except maybe President Zuma and the Speaker, because it looks like those supporters in the ANC's caucus that had the upper hand. Although there's a other message that comes from the ANC's NEC over the weekend, which endorsed the Ramaphosa initiative. So the ANC, to some extent, speaks with two voices on this matter.
Dr. Kotze, I want to ask you about the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House has now been targeted by the opposition parties as the problem. Do you see that as fair?
I think there's quite broad consensus that the way in which she has handled with the difficult issues in Parliament wasn't very appropriate. That's very difficult for her to play the role of a speaker, and that means to be, although she's a member of the governing party, that it is, as a speaker, she's supposed to be slightly more unbiased in her way of dealing and presiding over the meetings. And to a large extent, and I think most members of Parliament will agree with that she cannot play that role at the moment very effectively. She's playing the role of, to some extent, the protector of President Zuma, and that is so clear that it causes the resistance or the objections from the opposition side. I've heard even from some ANC people themselves that they concede now that they've made a mistake by moving out Max Sisulu and replacing him with Baleka Mbete, who is the ANC's national chairperson, therefore one of the top 6, and therefore highly involved in the management and the leadership of the ANC.
How do you view the police coming into Parliament, coming into the House to have to restore order?
It was very unfortunate, although it's not unconstitutional and not illegal, because in terms of the Powers and Privileges Act that's an act of Parliament, the Speaker has the authority to call in police. So if it was done on the authority of the Speaker, then it was legal. If the police themselves took the initiative, then obviously it's outside the legislative or legal framework. But I think to see police within Parliament is something that should be avoided at all costs. And that the security of police and the management of the National Assembly through the Speaker and the other persons there should really take the lead in keeping order in Parliament. But, I think the main problem is that it is in the Speaker's hands to try to calm down and to keep order. It is only in the most extreme cases where the police can be called in. And that is normally when there's incidents which almost amounts to criminal acts. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that, or fortunately, we haven't seen that. So I would say the presence of the police was very unfortunate.
Dr. Kotze, thank you for joining us today. That's political analyst Dr. Dirk Kotze joining us live from Pretoria. He is with the University of Pretoria. We're talking about, after this deal, to restore order to Parliament really has collapsed, of course, that yesterday after a meeting between the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, and a whole range of representatives from the opposition's parties in Parliament. The big story internationally, videos, we've got videos and posts from the streets of Ferguson in the United States, state of Missouri, are being posted, well, by the minute really, on social media networks like YouTube. This after the violent response by the community there after the grand jury decision not to bring charges against a white policeman who shot dead a black teenager, Michael Brown. Shops have been looted and several cars and buildings set ablaze. In the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, demonstrators hurled bottles and stones at the police and shots were fired. Police in riot gear, backed up by armoured vehicles, have used tear gas and smoke canisters to try and restore calm. Well, we'll keep you up to date with these videos being posted on our Newsroom Facebook page. So if you want to see what's been going on in Ferguson, go to our Newsroom Facebook page. But time now for us to take a quick little look at what you are talking about on social media. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. What are you talking about right now? It must be Ferguson. Yes, it must be Ferguson. Yes. Whatever says. Our thoughts go out to the Brown family tonight during their sorrow after the grand jury's decision. Alison Cox, disgusting that an innocent kid is murdered in the street and the perpetrator doesn't face trial but is set free. Yes, America is at boiling point. If you don't believe racism exists in America, number one, you're in denial. Number two, you live in white privilege. Number three, you are wrong. That one by Josie. Shalene Grierson says, Ferguson, it will never be fair, but you can't destroy your own community. Being violent is not the answer. You are doing what they think of you all. That is a terrible comment, actually. Araceli says, our nation as a whole should feel perpetual disappointment at the justice system. And there is a picture, as we scroll up, you see a picture, tires being burnt, community up in arms. Omer Melad says, hashtag revolution has started across multiple cities in the US. Hashtag Ferguson Black Friday, of course. This in response to the killing of Michael Brown in the city there. Well, let's take a look at what's happening on our Newsroom Facebook page. Of course, all those clips are on our Facebook page. You'll also see there that the Economic Freedom Fighters leader, Julius Malema, is pushing for a High Court order against the National Council of Provinces chairperson, Thandi Modise, to prevent certain rulings against him. Then we'll see hospital group Netcare will spend 2 billion rand next year to expand its existing facilities. This as the demand for private healthcare continues to grow in South Africa, and the state will present its arguments against the discharge application in the Shrindavani murder case in the Western Cape High Court today. You can find all of those stories and a whole lot more on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also go to sabc.co.za/news for all the latest updates. Well, a mini tornado has caused havoc last night in Soweto, leaving over 30 houses without roofs. This is the second storm to hit South Africa in less than 2 days and in a separate incident. Now, this massive tornado swept through parts of Vryheid and Dundee in KwaZulu-Natal on Saturday. According to the Weather Service, tornadoes can occur anywhere where a thunderstorm is possible and are most likely to occur midsummer, and in both incidents, no casualties were reported. Have to admit, that is a very impressive piece of video of that tornado in KwaZulu-Natal. Of course, the one in Soweto last night caused a whole lot of damage. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. We'll be back after a short little break.
Zoom into Africa. This is Libya. The chairman of the General National Congress is Mr. Nouri Abu Samen. Libya got independent from Italy on 10 February in 1947. The population is more than 6 million people. One of Libya's major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit, Libyan dinar.
Hello and welcome back to Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just recap those top stories this morning. We start in the United States this morning, where a decision by the grand jury not to indict a police officer for the fatal shooting of black teenager Michael Brown has resulted in rioting and looting in Ferguson, Missouri. Officer Darren Wilson potentially faced charges ranging from first-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter for the killing of Brown, in a case that has enraged the community. On hearing the decision, protesters went on the rampage, breaking into different stores, smashing windows and looting them. The family of Michael Brown have meanwhile expressed their disappointment at the decision but appealed for calm. The state will today present its arguments against the discharge application in the Srin Devani murder case in the Western Cape High Court. Devani's defence says the state has not presented any credible evidence upon which the court can convict him. A positive ruling for the defence in this application will see the end of the trial and Devani's acquittal on the charges against him. A ruling against it will either see the defence closing its case or calling witnesses of its own to testify. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa has blamed the Democratic Alliance for the collapse of the deal between him and opposition parties. Ramaphosa met with opposition leaders yesterday in an attempt to revive the deal that collapsed a day after it was reached last week. It included suspending sanctions against 20 EFF members of Parliament that could include having their salaries docked and being suspended from Parliament. Ramaphosa has accused the DA of going against the spirit of the deal. As always, all those top stories are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Well, Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Katrine. Lastly, but definitely not the least today, Christina Watson, CEO of South African educational publishing house Via Africa, has been named as one of Foreign Policy magazine's 100 leading global thinkers of 2014. Every year, Foreign Policy magazine recognizes a list of leading global thinkers, those who have translated their ideas into actions impacting millions worldwide. Christina Watson was recognized because of Via Africa's leading role in advancing digital education in South Africa. Via Africa has more than 60 years of experience in South Africa's educational publishing industry and has recently prioritized the development of South Africa's digital education landscape. Now, Christina joins us from our studio in Cape Town this morning. Good morning to you, Christina.
Good morning, Evan.
Firstly, congratulations. What an honor. What went through your mind when you heard the news first?
On the one hand, I was overwhelmed. And on the other hand, I thought, what a pity that not all the names and faces of the people at Via Africa and the National Department of Education who made this happen could have been on the list.
Leading global thinkers of 2014 in education in South Africa sounds a little bit like a misnomer, don't you agree?
Probably.
No, but all humor aside, where are we within education in South Africa? And is it as bad as they say?
No, it's not as bad as they say. People like to find reasons why things are not going well, but there are many reasons why things are happening as they should. Perhaps I should start by telling you how we got to the verdicts and what we learned from it. We've been involved in educational publishing, as you've said, for many years, but in 2012, when they started the implementation of the CAPS curriculum, we decided that we're going to do all our printed books in digital format, and not mere books behind glass, but proper enhanced material with video clips and multimedia, and everything that can work offline, which is, of course, crucial in the South African market. So we started doing that. We firmly believe that, the world is driven by technology. So if we do not expose our learners from a very early age to technology, especially the learners in the really deep rural areas and the poor learners, they will be even further left behind. So as Via Africa, we embrace the e-content and we embrace the devices that we could deliver it on. And we experimented a bit. We developed all kinds of apps like the Test Yourself app that learners can use to prepare themselves for exams from grade 4 to grade 12. And then we got to a point where we had to ask ourselves the question, so how do we know that this is going to really work in the deep rural areas? So we partnered with Breadline Africa and the Mandela Center for Memory, and we launched 3 digital education centers VADICs, we call them, which is the result of a vigorous debate, what we should call it. We launched them in Mpumalanga and Limpopo and the Free State. And what we've done was we've taken old shipping containers, we refurbished them, we branded them very brightly coloured on the outside with curriculum content to enhance visual learning. And inside we put 15 Android tablets and a PC. And on the tablets, of course, all our digital content. And there's 4 things that we believe is really essential to make any digital experience happening, and that is the right e-content, the sufficient technology, the right pedagogy to underpin the whole experience, and then a well-trained teacher. So we set out creating all 4 of these elements. We offer training to the teachers, initially just how to use the technology and later on how to construct a lesson. For example, finding your school on Google Earth and design a lesson around that. And the impact was amazing. We saw the first results after the October ANA exams where we could have access to the unmoderated results, and the impact was significant. We're very happy with that.
Christina, how are our kids learning today in the new world, the new school, as it were? How are they learning, and how are we comparing with the rest of the world in the digital space?
I think all over the world, people are still playing around and seeing what is really effective. You know, the tendency is there to say, okay, we need digital material. Let's take tablets or let's take computers and set up a computer room, and there you go, now we digitalized. And that's not the case. You know, a lot of research has to go into it and a lot of trial and testing, and people across the world is busy doing it. And so much so in South Africa as well. The Department of Basic Education already in 2004 published the e-learning white paper. And they set a goal back then that by 2013 all learners in South Africa must be comfortable working with technology. And of course we haven't reached that, and mainly due to a lack of funds and bandwidth issues and the fact that a heck of a lot of training is required in order to do it effectively. But the will is still there, and I think that is exciting. If all of us can take hands and make it happen together, it can happen. The department is committed to implement digital education in South Africa, and I think I've recently been to USA to look at different states there to see what's happening there. And I can honestly say, there's states there that's further behind than we are. We are really not looking bad.
Christina, finally, you've got a minute to tell us what needs to happen within the short term for us to make this digital transition work for South Africa.
I think it depends on each and every one of us. I believe digital is the way to go. It can shape the future. We have learned a lot, and what we want to do as Via Africa is we want to make our learnings available to other corporate entities so that they can establish their own digital education centres. We will do the work. We can show measurable results based on learners' individual performance. And we believe that it needs to happen here and it needs to happen now. If you have every single child you have with a proper tablet in hand, with digital content on it, with a well-trained teacher that can construct a decent lesson, is a child that can effectively and truly contribute to the economy and that can compete on an equal basis with his peers. And that is our goal, and we can do that.
Well, that's the good news. Thank you very much. Christina Watson, who is the CEO of South African educational publishing house Via Africa. Well, she's been named as Foreign Policy Magazine's 100 leading global thinkers of 2014, and that in part is for taking the digital transformation to all South African students. Let's finally take a quick look at what's on social media, what you're talking about at SABC Newsroom. Of course, that's where we are. Alex Jaworski says, it's so windy out, I wouldn't be surprised to wake up and find my house on the other side of the city. Talking about the tornado in Johannesburg last night. Kabelo Sotwane says, it's not a snake in the sky, it's a tornado. Again, these people, maybe he's having a bit of fun. If my backyard is in one piece by the end of the night, I'll be impressed, says Sam Berry. Joanne Bastian says, if you could see my living room right now, then you would know why I'm serving turkey dinner at the church. And there we also have a picture. What is that picture? It's of a cell just before the... that's Newswall, South Africa. Soweto residents want help after tornado damages homes in that part of Johannesburg. There you have a picture of that cell that's about to form a tornado. 30 homes were damaged in Soweto, and hopefully those affected will be assisted. That's where we leave you today. Thank you for watching Newsroom. This show is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also repeat at 2 in the afternoon with a total rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. And if you missed all of those, we also stream live on YouTube in the morning between 9 and 10 with a whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. Go to SABC Digital News, look for Newsroom. This, of course, is SABC News. You have been watching Newsroom, where we love it in the morning.
Ja, ik heb een paar bezig. Hoe kom?
Zoom into Africa. This is Burkina Faso. The president is Mr. Blaise Compaoré. Burkina Faso got independent from France on 5th August 1960. The population is more than 17 million people. One of Burkina Faso's major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is CFA.
Cameroon's economic capital, a unique art collection is on display. Titled Yesterday's Memory, Tomorrow's Memory.
We are trying to preserve this heritage despite many things that have changed in the designing, embroidery and the model.
If I'm telling you, you don't like it, I call it defeat.
Join Musam Khalipi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
Do you think that the media has then fully unpacked of what these strikes could possibly do to the economy if it's going to that extent of a recession?
It doesn't mean that when we solve the mining strike that suddenly the GDP is going to go and increase and we're all going to go and have an economic boom.
True,
so
yes.
we've got to go and look at that fact as well.
Obviously, the media, can't touch on absolutely everything.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very complicated situation.
Watch Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali, Sundays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News channel.
The Herero. The various tribes forming the Herero group and speaking a common language are the Himba, also known as the Ovimba, the Herero, the Chimba, and the Banduru. Currently, there are about 107,000 Hereros living in Namibia, southern Angola, and Botswana. Unfortunately, little is known of their origin. It is believed that they were descendants of a large group of people who migrated southward from Central Africa during the 16th century. Their traditions clearly show that the origin stemmed from the Great Rift Valley in East Africa. At some stage, they divided into two groups. One crossed the Okavango River and entered into the Gobas area east of Windhoek, Namibia. In 1842, some Herero chiefs joined forces with Nama and Olama tribes to organize a resistance against the Namas. The chiefs were convinced that this would help them in their battles with other Herero chiefs over land and livestock. German settlers established their presence on the coast of modern Namibia and soon moved inland as they began to consolidate their occupation of the area. Until the colonial period, the Herero prospered in central grasslands of the area. This is where they had ample grazing for their cattle. During this period, large number of Herero fled into the safety of Botswana. But since independence, some of these people have begun to return to Namibia. The Herero are proud cattle farmers who measure their wealth in cattle. The importance of cattle to these people is evident in the Herero women's dress. The traditional dress is derived from a Victorian woman's dress and consists of an enormous amount of woven several petticoats with horn-shaped hats. This is to represent the horns of a cow. The history of the Herero clothing is extraordinary. The missionaries who first introduced the Victorian dress, which the tribes gradually accessorized by adding cow horns as a headdress. Between 1893 and 1903, the Herero and the Nama people's lands, as well as their cattle, were seized by military force of the Germans, who regarded them as subhuman. In 1903, the Herero people learned that they had been placed in reservations, leaving more room for colonialists to own the land and prosper. But in 1904, the Herero and the Nama began to rebel, and this lasted until 1907. It is estimated that 80,000 Hereros currently live in German Southwest Africa. Today, there are around 250,000 Herero people living in Southwest Africa. Herero culture remains, the cattle remain, and our responsibility to their existence also remains.
It's 10:00 hours Central African time on this Tuesday, the 25th of November 2014. Kalimera, Shalom, Molweni, Tobela, Kunjani, Assalamu alaikum, como esta, namaste, bonjour, goeiemorgen, ni hao, konnichiwa, privet, nda, jumbo Africa. And a very warm welcome to AM News on SABC News Channel 404. You have to stay with us as we bring you only the latest news from here and around the globe. My name is Elvis Preston. I'll be your host until 12:30. With me is our sports anchor, Kendall Makamate. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Elvis. It's a big footballing night tonight, I tell you. Polokwane City in the PSL are looking to upset Kaizer Chiefs when they meet later on this evening. And in the UEFA Champions League, Lionel Messi could set possibly the world's shortest record ever if he breaks the goal-scoring record for Champions League, because tomorrow we get Ronaldo, who might be breaking it himself.
Well, that's all coming up with Kendall. Exciting stuff in a short while. But right now, let's take a look at all your headlines. The ANC has disbanded its Youth Wing's national task team and has called for the National Elective Conference to now be a policy conference. Clashes have erupted in Ferguson in the United States after a jury decided that a white police officer who killed an unarmed black teenager will not face charges. And as you heard from Kendall in your sports news, Bayern Munich will visit struggling Man City and top